Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of what I'm looking to call Horrors and Hoaxes. This is a series that I've been working on putting together to delve into some of the things that fascinate me a bit and get the topics out of my brain. It is quite a bit different than what I normally put out on this channel, so if you're not interested, I understand if you don't watch. And if you are, I appreciate any engagement or feedback that you might have on the topics or on my presentation, as I am obviously learning and things will change as time goes on. In this series, I look forward to delving into some of the things that fascinate me, whether it be true crime, disasters, mysteries, and anything else that might fall under the category of a horror or a hoax. I will be doing my best to make sure I research each subject sufficiently, but if there are things that I miss or seem important to the conversation that I don't touch on, feel free to let me know in the comments. Criticism is always welcome. And without further ado, please join me for the first episode, The Persian Princess. In the year 2000, an artifact appeared that would shake the international community of archaeologists and lovers of antiquities alike. In March, Oscar Muscarella of the New York Metropolitan Museum received 4 Polaroid photographs of what appeared to be a mummy in a sarcophagus. Her coffin was made of stone and set within a wooden box. A god from Zoroastrian religion known as Ahura Mazda was carved into the wood. The mummy was adorned in elaborate display, with a gold crown atop her head and a mask covering her face. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and she wore a breastplate that was covered in cuneiform inscriptions. The antiquities dealer who reached out to Muscarella with the photographs claimed to be working on behalf of someone residing in Pakistan and offered the mummy up to him for sale. It didn't take long for Muscarella to decide that the mummy's authenticity was something that he doubted, and he didn't pursue the purchase much further. Even though the dealer had offered a translation from a so-called major American university of the cuneiform writings, Muscarella doubted some of the iconography. After going back and forth with the dealer for a small amount of time, he considered himself done with the affair and he just moved on. Later, in October of the same year, Pakistani police were alerted to a video that was making its way through the criminal underground. The video showed images of a mummy and sarcophagus, offering to sell it to the black market collectors for a whopping sum of $11 million. While this is obviously not a small amount of money, the claims that were being attached to the mummy would make that a hard price to turn down for any collector. The ancient Egyptians were so dedicated to the process of mummification and readying remains for their travels in the afterlife that the imagery of Egyptian mummies is still strong to this day, and probably what most people associate a mummy with. However, throughout history, there has been many other places in the world that have practiced some form of mummification, from monks in China who practice self-mummification through slow starvation and self-embalming, to the indigenous Guanche mummies found in the Canary Islands. It is hardly a practice that only exists in one place. However, up until this point, there had never been evidence of mummification in Persia found, never any physical proof. But according to the claims in this video, that was exactly what was going on. There was now brand new evidence in the form of a mummy that was being sold to black market collectors. It's extremely important to note that sales of antiquities like this in Pakistan are illegal. Items with such significant historical context are considered to be property of the country itself. Items are often put on display, and they do offer an appeal for drawing in tourists and researchers, but they are not allowed to be sold by the people who live within the country. When police tracked down a man who seemed to be connected to the video, they found Ali Akbar, who claimed to have only filmed and distributed it. He alleged that he was not the person selling the mummy and that he did not have her in his possession. Instead, he pointed them to Wali Muhammad Riki. Police followed this lead to find Riki at his home. The tribal leader admitted that he was indeed in possession of the mummy and that he'd been attempting to sell it, along with another man who'd originally found it after it allegedly unearthed during an earthquake. Authorities seized the mummy, and Akbar and Riki were later charged for breaking Pakistani antiquity laws. With the mummy now in possession of the police, she was taken to the National Museum in Karachi, and news of her arrival quickly spread, both nationally and internationally. In a press conference on October 26, it was announced that the remains were from a princess dated all the way back to 600 BC. Museum officials shared information from their preliminary examination of the mummy with the press, who were eager to share the story with the rest of the world. Her remains lay on top of a mat coated in wax and honey and were further covered by a stone slab that had more cuneiform inscriptions carved into it. Multiple theories of her true identity were brought forward as the mystique of her story unfolded. Shortly after the press conference, the Iranian Cultural Heritage Organization claimed that the mummy was a member of the Persian royal family. They said they would take legal action through UNESCO for its return. The Pakistani Archaeological Department headquarters argued that since it was found on purely Pakistani soil, it belonged to them. In return, Iran threatened to cooperate with Interpol for return of the mummy, and the Taliban even stepped in to demand their archaeologists play a role in determining who truly owned this princess. Even within Pakistan, there was division among the people when it came to ownership. People in Quetta demanded that the police should return the mummy to them since that was where she had been found. With everyone vying for the mummy, it was slowly becoming clear that the National Museum wasn't 100% sure of what they were holding. Local press stated that insurance companies were reluctant to cover the remains until it had been fully determined what they were in possession of. Arguments continued over whether the inscription was legitimate or if she had even originated in Iran or Pakistan in the first place, as no evidence of mummification had existed in either place prior. There were even theories that she could have possibly been smuggled out of Egypt and given a new fake sarcophagus upon her arrival in Pakistan. 2 weeks after discovery of the mummy hit the press, Oscar Muscarella visited the Offices of Archaeology, a publication of the Archaeological Institute of America. While he had remained unaware of the discovery up until this point, upon being asked for his thoughts, Muscarella became aware of the similarities between the princess and the pictures he had been sent back in March. He shared his version of the events that occurred between him and the dealer, explaining the exact reasons that he'd politely declined the sale. I do want to preface this part with a bit of information about Muscarella to give some credence to the type of person that he was. Muscarella was a renowned archaeologist who brought forth claims of fake or suspect pieces in some of the biggest museums in the world. He contended that 45 pieces of Near Eastern art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art fell into this category. Even one of the most treasured works there, 4,000-year-old cyclodatic harpist, is, according to him, as young as 2 generations old. He claimed that the Met is not alone in this so-called forgery culture. 1,250 suspicious Near Eastern artworks worldwide are scattered throughout the Louvre, the British Museum, and countless other smaller museums from the United States to Jerusalem. He also claimed that some of these donations are accepted quietly from rich benefactors as to keep them funding or supporting the museums. When Muscarella joined the Met in 1965, he started to question the ethics of this acceptance of forgery. In 1971, he was fired for these questions, and it took 7 years in the courts before he was reinstated to be allowed to continue research at the museum, with others still taking offense to his stance on ethical antiquities. I think this is important to note, as many archaeologists throughout the years have not taken the time to seek validity of items or looked into the history enough to make sure they had been ethically obtained from their original sources. By its nature, this field is ripe with colonizers taking and bestowing things that were never theirs to give. I think it's important to acknowledge when somebody is trying to do right by the artifacts and the people they come from, and that is certainly Muscarella's legacy at this point. Muscarella was an untiring opponent of the looting of ancient sites, and he had earned a reputation as the conscience of the discipline in his field. As someone who specialized in the Near Eastern art and archaeology of Anatolia and Persia, Muscarella had a distinctive advantage when looking into the mummy that had been offered up to him. According to Muscarella, the dealer claimed that the mummy was the daughter of the Persian king Xerxes, referring to an attached one-page translation of the cuneiform inscription on the breastplate. It seemingly read, "I am the daughter of the great king Xerxes. Mazareka, protect me. I am Rodugana, I am." But something felt off about this, so he researched further. When Muscarella reached out to the university that had done the translation, he discovered that the dealer had intentionally left out information acquired during the initial report. The full translation had deemed the cuneiform to be flawed, and most likely copied directly from a Behistun inscription that already existed on a large rock relief in western Iran. The multilingual inscription was carved during the reign of Darius, the father of Xerxes. The dealer's representative responded to the claims of the false inscription by offering to send a piece of the coffin to be carbon dated. However, the analysis determined that the coffin was only around 250 years old. Muscarella, who firmly believed in ethical antiquities, determined that this was a fake and contacted Interpol through the FBI with what information he had about it. With information about the authenticity of the mummy coming to light and the governments fighting over who truly held the right to the remains, the researchers working on studying her were determined to find out what they could quickly. Pakistani professor Ahmad Dani, director of the Institute of Asian Civilizations in Islamabad, studied the item, quickly realizing that the corpse was not even as old as the coffin was. And perhaps equally as interesting, the mat below the body was only about 5 years old. He contacted Asma Ibrahim, the curator of the National Museum of Pakistan, who investigated further. During her investigation, Iran and the Taliban repeated their demands, staking claim on the remains. The Taliban even claimed that they had apprehended the smugglers that had taken the mummy out of Afghanistan in the first place. As Ibrahim studied the remains, she found that the inscriptions on the breastplate were not in proper grammatical Persian. Even the name of the so-called princess was off. While Rodugina was indeed the daughter of Xerxes, this was how the Greeks referred to her. If the sarcophagus was real, they would have used the Persian version, which is closer to Verdigona. CAT and X-ray scans in Aga Khan Hospital indicated that the mummification had not been made following ancient Egyptian customs either. In ancient Egypt, one of the most important parts of preserving the body for the afterlife involved keeping the heart intact inside the body. This mummy had hers removed. Along with this, the method that had been used for removing her brain from her skull did not match up with how Egyptians removed theirs either. Even further, tendons and pieces inside the inner ear that should have decayed over the centuries that she was dead were still intact. On April 17, 2001, Ibrahim published her detailed report. In it, she surmised that the so-called Persian princess was undoubtedly a fake. She was a woman about 21 to 25 years of age who had died around 1996. She was around 4 feet 7 inches and had possibly been killed by blunt force trauma. Her teeth had been removed, her hips, pelvis, and backbone were also damaged. Her body cavity had been filled with sodium bicarbonate in an attempt to speed along the drying out of her remains. Following this information, a murder investigation was opened by the Pakistani police as they searched for the true identity of the woman and hunted for her possible killer. There was some that believed the perpetrators of this fraud obtained a fresh corpse from grave robbers who looted a burial from the area between Pakistan and Iran. The forgers would have then had to remove the corpse's internal organs and covered the body with chemicals to dry the body over the course of months. This was an intricate forgery that most likely took months to execute and had to involve at minimum a scholar, someone familiar with anatomy, and someone capable of goldsmithing. With the inconsistencies in the cuneiform and markings that were found that appeared to be made from a pencil, it didn't seem that whoever had made the inscriptions knew much about cuneiform in general. So at minimum, that would require one less expert. As more was uncovered about the state of the body, it was theorized that for the state of decomposition to be so low at the time of mummification, it had to have begun almost immediately following the woman's death. It seemed highly unlikely a robbed grave would be fresh enough for that. In fact, it seemed highly unlikely that it would be possible at all unless someone knew exactly when she was going to die. The men who were involved in the attempts to sell the remains were questioned extensively, but to no avail. There were other suspects reported to be arrested and questioned, but answers seemed extremely limited. There seemed to be nothing that pointed the authorities in the right direction of the young woman's identity or how she had come to meet this tragic fate. As time went on, interest dwindled and the case went even more cold than you could consider it to be in the first place. In August of 2005, the Edhi Foundation took custody of the remains and announced that she would be laid to rest with proper burial rites. It was not until 2008 that her burial was finally carried out, and unfortunately, her identity was as much a mystery at this time as it was from the time that she'd been discovered. It seems highly unlikely now, in 2024, that her family will ever receive closure or answers, or really any sort of information from this. And though I can hope that they do, it seems that this horror of a hoax is all that we will ever know about the so-called Persian princess. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.